You are listening to episode number 37 of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. Before we get started with today's special guest episode that I'm just so excited to share with you, I wanted to remind you that there is still time for you to be a guest, so to speak, on the podcast. I am looking for listeners to share 30 seconds of advice and tips for how you reach every diverse learner in your classes. And I'm going to take those audio clips and compile them together for an episode that's coming out in a few weeks. So I would love to hear from you. All you have to do is head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/beonsss for all the details on how to submit your advice and have your audio featured on the podcast. Now, let me tell you about this episode specifically because y'all are in for a special treat this week. I interviewed a longtime internet friend, so to speak, Michelle Brosseau from Miss Brosseau's Binder. She is someone who I've said for years, I wish I could be a student in her classroom. And I think after listening to this episode, it will be clear why I say that. Michelle Brosseau is a high school science teacher specializing in physics, earth and space science, and making learning fun. Whether it's teaching the physics of bubbles, demonstrating drag forces with indoor skydiving, or wearing her astronaut costume, or her velociraptor sweater, or her molecules dress, or her fossils blouse, Michelle embraces her nerdiness to energize her students' learning. Michelle has a professional Master of Education degree with a classroom specialist focus. She weaves her love of art, science, and all things nerdy into her educational resources. In this episode, she shares her best advice for teaching physics. She shares how she rearranged her course sequence to best set her students up for success, how she transformed her classroom from being competitive to collaborative, and amazingly helpful advice for incorporating demos and labs in your science classes. She also shares how she uses projects to engage students and a few grading hacks that you do not want to miss hearing. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode with the amazing Michelle Brosseau. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I'm passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You're in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Hey, Michelle, how are you?
I'm great, Rebecca. How are you doing?
I am thrilled because I get to be here with you this afternoon, and you are one of my longtime internet friends, if you will. And so I'm just tickled to have you on the podcast. So for the listeners who are maybe listening who don't know you, although they should, tell us who you are and tell us about your history as a teacher and your training and all of that.
Oh, excellent. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Michelle Brosseau, and I teach physics and earth and space science and general science to students in grades 9 through 12 in my hometown in Ontario. I'm entering my 14th year of teaching, and my entire career has been spent at my alma mater. So this is the high school that I went to.
That is so fun. Okay, so tell me what science classes for 9th through 12th graders are like in Ontario, because I know we've talked before. Y'all do things a little bit differently than we do in the States. So tell us what it's like.
That's right. I love the way that we approach this. So in 9th and 10th, students get a unit each of chemistry, biology, earth and space science, and physics. So in 9 and 10th, they get a little taste of everything. And then it's grade 11 and grade 12 where they start to choose their science courses. So a student can enter grade 11 and they can choose to take physics, chemistry, biology, environmental science, earth and space science, but they all have a little taste. They all have a base knowledge from what they get in grades 9 and 10.
That's awesome. So do all of your students take 4 years of science to graduate?
No, what they need is at least 2 years plus a third course.
Okay, great. Okay, so tell me, I know you've taught so many things over your 14 years, but what have been your favorite subjects to teach?
It's like choosing a favorite child. Like
It's impossible. I know. It's
how
so
do you
hard.
choose between physics and earth and space science? It can't be done.
So those are your top two.
Those are my top two.
I love it. And you've definitely been an awesome resource. I love following you for all things space. And I'm excited to hear and for you to share all things physics on this episode with us, because that's the one we're going to focus in on today, which will be fun. Well, I want to know what led you then to become a secondary science teacher, because I can clearly see you love the subjects, but any other reason why you decided to become a teacher?
So I knew that I wanted to teach since like forever, but I didn't discover that love of science and math until my high school courses. So when I applied for university, I applied for a program that allowed me to teach and do my undergrad at the same time, which was really neat. So concurrently, I would take my math and my physics courses, and then in the evening, I would do my teaching courses. And then each May, I would go into a classroom and do my practice teaching. And that was really reaffirming that I was 18 years old, teaching in a grade 8 classroom, knowing for sure this is where I needed to be.
That's amazing that you had that much experience in your university training.
Absolutely. Yes. It was so worthwhile.
I love that. Man, I wish my program had been like that. I really didn't get to be in the classroom much until my third and fourth years. And then it was, just student teaching. I didn't have that nighttime experience. That's amazing. I love that you got to do that. So let me know then, I think you said 14 years, right? You've been doing
this? This is my 14th. I'm going into my 14th year.
Okay. So you have seen all of the crazy of the last few years. What is keeping you in the field? Like, what is keeping you doing this when so many teachers are choosing not to?
Oh, you know what it is. It's the students.
Yes.
It's the students for sure. They are absolutely a ray of sunshine every single day. So even though we were going through just absolute craziness with the pandemic, you could see the bright in every single day. And when we were pandemic teaching, it was very polarizing because I had two very different experiences. One, when we were in class and we were very strictly cohorted. So we had quadmesters in which we would have the students for an entire week, all day, 5 hours a day for 5 days. And then we would switch out with a different class the following week and just alternate class A and B for, 10 weeks. So that was really interesting because we had the students for basically 25 hours of a week. And now if you're thinking about that in an English or a history course, you might think, well, what am I going to do? But in a science course, you're like, what can't I do? Because I have them for the entire day. There was no limit on what we could do. So we could have the students doing labs and we could have demonstrations. I would bring my class out to these century-old trees and we would do problem solving in the shade. It was incredible when we were in person. I know that it wasn't the best for assessment because it wasn't like we could do a test every day when we were only in class for 22 days. But those relationships that we formed just by being this little tight-knit group for 25 hours a week was incredible.
That sounds fun. And it's nice that, like you said, it's perfect for science because we're just you have the time to constantly switch it up and do so many different things. And I love the emphasis on relationships and not as much on assessments. That sounds like a dream.
It was so perfect. I will definitely remember those students, but I'm finding now that these students that I had 100% online, when they see me in the community, they're like, oh, hi, Mrs. Brosseau. And I'm like, I don't recognize you because you were just a rectangle.
Yes, that's so hard. Man.
So that was really hard teaching online versus having them for an entire day. It was very polarizing in that way. But the students definitely were the bright light during that pandemic teaching.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we're on the other side of it now. And I am just so excited to have you here because I really wanted to bring you in. I know you love Earth and space science, but you also are my go-to recommendation for anyone looking for physics things. So I really was hopeful for this episode that you could help me help the teachers listening who are new to teaching physics. So this might be, a biology person like me who gets thrown into teaching physics for the first time, or it could just be a new science teacher in general. But essentially, I would just love to hear any and all advice you would give teachers new to teaching physics, because I know that's a course that you've had a lot of experience teaching.
Absolutely. This will be year 14 of teaching physics. So I know my way around the subject. So I know a lot of teachers, especially biology teachers, chemistry teachers, and math teachers, they're very much voluntold. And I know you can't see the air quotes on the podcast, but they're voluntold to teach physics. And this is one that I chose to teach because I love it so much. It's such a great course. It's such a great unit of study because it really teaches the students how the universe works. So looking at this course as a course that students take to learn more about the universe as a whole, that's a good mindset to have going into it. It's really, really interesting. I think the biggest issue that teachers have going into this is, how do I plan for this course? What's the sequence of this course? And when I started out, a fresh teacher, I just went with the same order that I had been taught in, which is starting with kinematics and motion, which led to parent conferences, you know what's happening, where they're saying, oh, why is my son or daughter not doing so well in physics? And I would always have to say, well, it's just this first unit. It's the trickiest one. It's got a steep learning curve. And then I thought to myself, what do I keep saying this over and over and over? Why am I starting with this unit? So I decided to move kinematics. That's the first one, acceleration, that sort of thing. So to move that second and to bring in something that was more accessible for the students. In this case, where I live, students have a really good knowledge of chemistry going into grade 11 physics. So for me, it was nuclear energy, and they love it. And what's so great about this is that it really builds their confidence. So you've got students that are just starting this new course. They don't really know what to expect in physics. And then they have something familiar. They see the atom. They know the Bohr-Rutherford diagram. They know about ions. So now we just introduce isotopes. And within a week or so, they're doing calculations using E is equal to mc squared. And holy moly, is that a confidence booster when they are a couple of weeks into physics using Einstein's equation. That really boosts their confidence. So what I would recommend for teachers who are starting physics is to take a critical look at the units that you need to teach and whether they necessarily need to be taught in that order.
Yes, I could not agree more with you. I felt the same way with when I was student teaching, and my student teaching mentor started with biochemistry with our biology students. And it was so overwhelming for them. And then we got to cells. And like you said, cells is for us in biology is something that they all saw in 7th grade life science. Like you said, they all are familiar with the nucleus and a mitochondria. And I love what you said about starting with something like that builds their confidence rather than just shuts them down from the beginning of the year. And something I've said so many times on this podcast is so many things and sequences and scopes are required. And I'm doing quotation marks. But how required is required? Is it just a strong suggestion? Because I think what you just said is so important, of really consider your students and what's going to best serve them. Because I think kind of an old school way of teaching is let's start with the hardest thing and scare them, and then we'll ease up the rest of the year. And I love what you said. No, let's start with a confidence booster. So they're loving the subject and they feel good about it. I love that idea.
Absolutely. I want to give the students a quick win, and I don't want to be a gatekeeper for physics. There's too much of that where students are being dissuaded or told not to take physics for a multitude of reasons. Some of them are just awful. Girls being told that physics is not a subject for girls. That's so untrue. So instead, I'd much rather be a helping hand to guide these students and show them that they can do it, rather than gatekeeping and expecting students to drop the course. Since doing that change of starting with nuclear energy, I don't think I've had any students drop grade 11 physics.
That is so great. And you're probably having less of those parent conferences too that you mentioned.
None.
Love it. And that reclaims your time too, which is great. Okay, what else? What else do we need to know about teaching physics? I'm going to start taking notes in case I ever teach physics on the road.
Another thing that you should do is to ask for grant money. So if you're inheriting a physics classroom with a mishmash of equipment that you don't even know what it's for, one, we have a great physics teacher community Facebook group where you can post pictures of your mystery equipment. And the game that we love to play is, what is this mystery piece of equipment?
I love that, because I can literally picture things that I found in my own classroom where I was like, what is this? So that's such a fun game.
It's perfect. And the community there is fantastic. And then from there, I mean, just ask for what you need. So what I would recommend is when you're asking for this grant money, ask nicely and really explain the benefit to the students. What will this equipment do? And year after year, you can build up that physics equipment with something that's new and modern and that students can navigate, because some of that old equipment is tricky. But you can also do physics on a very limited budget, dollar store physics. A lot of labs can be done with meter sticks and marbles and string, and in my case, paint. I love to do the pendulum painting. So a lot of things are simple.
I'll make sure to link that video of your pendulum painting in the show notes so that people can see that. And then do you have a link for that Facebook group? Because I can link that too.
Yes, absolutely. It's just Physics Teacher Community on Facebook.
Do you run that or are you just in it?
I'm the admin. Yeah.
Oh, look at you. All right. So you said really look at your sequence, how you can best serve students. Also ask for grant money. Those are great suggestions. What else should we do?
Focus on collaboration. So this is one of those scenarios where students shouldn't be working by themselves. They really need support from one another. So one thing that I wish I could go back in time and fix with my early teaching was that I made physics kind of competitive. I would have groups of students and I would play these games, and it was a lot of, like, looking back, it was a lot of who can solve this problem the fastest. And now, 14 years in, I don't care how fast students solve problems anymore. I'm just looking, are you being challenged with these problems? I would prefer that students move slowly through tougher problems than rapid fire these problems that we would do in these competitive games. So I've really shifted how I teach physics to make it more collaborative and far, 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 far less competitive.
I love that. I come from a family with 3 engineers. So all the physics in my family, and all of them have said, and they're all in different branches of engineering, but they've all said it's not in isolation at all. They're all working on these teams. Like my brother designs bridges and you're on a team of people. So that's so important. Like there's no reason to, foster the competition instead of the collaboration. So what would be like a practical example of how you do that?
So the way that I like to approach collaboration now is pretty much daily in physics. I will pose a problem to the students, and then I have this deck of cards. And I shuffle these cards as I'm explaining the problem to the students. And then I'll deal out groups of 3. And then these students in groups of 3, it's completely random. They'll go to whiteboards that I have around the classroom. And then they work together on solving this problem. I like when the problems combine a couple units together. So they have to think back to, how did we solve this previously? How can we connect that with what we currently know? And I like to give these problems out loud if I can. So one that worked really well this past school year was design a roller coaster with a maximum speed of 100 kilometers per hour and a loop at the top of which the riders feel weightless. So that gives them an opportunity to pull all sorts of information from what they've learned in the past, and it connects a whole bunch of units. What I really liked about this problem was at the end of it, I had a student say to me, that problem made me think I was dumb. And I said, whoa, 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 whoa. Backspace those last 3 words. That problem made you think. It wasn't a plug and chug. You didn't just have to put some values into an equation. You had to think about that. And that's what I really value in the class, rather than just here's an equation. Here's how you identify which values go into each variable.
Well, and I love that they're not alone, because that would make you feel defeated too. It's not like you're sending them off to do this by themselves and just power through, but you're saying, okay, let's work with your classmates and let's figure this out.
Absolutely. And if they're stuck with their small group, then they can absolutely go to the next group and get some information. So just watching that information spread around the classroom is really neat to see, and it just changes the culture. We're all in this together. We're all learning together. It's not one student trying to outperform another.
Yes. Okay. So thinking of new teachers, pacing and lesson planning is hard. How do you know how much time to leave for a problem like that for your students?
Sometimes those problems will take the entire 75-minute class, and the learning that goes on in that 75 minutes is so worth it. when you think about it, would they gain more from just copying notes from the board or from the document camera? Or would they gain more in their learning from actually doing a problem and going through that productive struggle? So sometimes I have to throw out the second half of the lesson because it took them longer than expected, but the learning that's happening is so worth it.
I love that perspective. And I love your ability to be flexible because that is not a strong suit of mine. And so I'm so glad you're here because you're helping all the people. Okay. Anything else for new teachers teaching physics?
At some point, you have to cut off the units. So you cannot teach mechanics for the entire year unless your entire course is mechanics. But there is so much interesting content if you spend the time teaching waves and sound, teaching light and optics, teaching modern physics, teaching nuclear physics. Those units are so interesting. Your students will love them. So don't let students think that physics is just solving with vectors and solving projectile motion problems. There's so much more than that.
You make a great point. And I'm so glad that you said that because that's something, especially as a first year teacher, you could get caught in the weeds, trudging through some of that stuff, like you said, like kinematics, and you're spending so much time there and you run out of time for all the other things. So thinking back to your first years in the classroom, is there anything you wish, whether it doesn't have to necessarily be physics specific, because I know you've taught so many different things, but anything else just you wish you could do differently as a science teacher in general?
You know what? I would embrace my nerdiness earlier. Like, me, I literally wear my nerdiness on me every day.
I love it. I love
lesson.
all of your science clothes. It's the best.
So I would really embrace that earlier because I found that really freeing. I stopped coming in necessarily dressed professionally. I don't know whether I can say that, but I just, I would start wearing dresses with math equations on them and dresses with stars and blouses with dinosaurs. And I just felt that really helped the relationships and helped the students know that this was going to be a great class. There's an element of fun in this class. And I definitely love the subject. There's no doubt about that.
I love that. That's something we've talked about in the Secondary Science Simplified course and the Facebook group is, I think oftentimes we look back to these teachers that we've had that have really influenced us and we want to mimic traits we saw in them, which is wonderful. But at the end of the day, you have to be you and your students are going to react and relate to you best when you are being your most authentic self and not trying to be another type of person. Like I had a coworker who I love, who I had on the podcast a while ago, Jamie Whitlock, and she had a really good like maternal energy and students responded to that so well. And so I tried to be that way because I wanted them to respond to me that way, but that's not me. And I was like trying to be someone I wasn't. And then once I changed it up and try to be more myself, it just became so much more natural to do this job and fun.
Absolutely. Like bring in the fun every day. You can absolutely have fun every day in class, even if you're teaching projectile motion. You know what? Especially if you're teaching projectile motion. We have some great labs for that.
Well, and I'm going to link your Instagram because if anyone follows you for 2 seconds, they're going to see how much fun you are. And that's one of the reasons why I've loved following you. And I've always joked that I wish I could be in your class because you are so creative and you seem to be just so hands-on with your students. And physics especially is just a great subject for doing that. So I would love any advice that you have for teachers who feel intimidated by demos or intimidated by labs, physics or not, but because I feel like it just appears like you dive into that head first and that can kind of be intimidating, especially if it's, you're doing it for a content area that you're nervous about teaching.
100%. And I can relate to this too. I am not well-versed in biology. It's not my love. It's not my passion. So I know we kind of talk about this back and forth on
DMs,
Instagram in the DMs. Biology is just not where my heart is. So labs can be overwhelming. And I feel this way for sure about chemistry and biology. But each time I teach those courses or those units, I just challenge myself to add one more lab or one more demo into each of those units. So that way I can better understand it. And by just adding one of each, it's not that overwhelming. But in the long run, that gives me this library of labs and demos to share with my students. So learning a little bit along the way, you don't have to figure it all out in your first year.
That is such great advice because it is easy to like follow people on Instagram or just see these teachers and you're like, you're amazing. Like, I want to do a demo a day like you. Like, that sounds so fun. But you're right. Like, just start small and build up your repertoire, if you will, of things. I like to also, I did this with AP Bio. I would take some of the labs that I like wasn't feeling as confident in to let students do, and I would do them as demos first. And then once I was like, okay, I really get this, now I feel ready to like let them get it. And then I can let them, kind of take over and make a lab from it. But you're right, just starting small makes a big difference. Do you have a favorite demo or lab that you would do, or where you would tell a new physics teacher, like, you've got to do this one?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I've got a few. So I think in kinematics, when you're teaching projectile motion, one lab that I love is using projectile launchers to hit action figures. The students love it. There's so much buy-in, but there's enough calculations to keep them on task. And you give them, one shot to hit the action figure that's suspended from the ceiling. It is so much fun. When I teach simple harmonic motion, that can be really boring, but I teach it through pendulum painting, which is so much fun, and it marries so many topics together, and it includes a little calculus in case any of your students are taking that. So it kind of relates to what they're learning in their math courses. And I have a freebie for that one if your listeners would like a lesson plan and a student worksheet for that.
Yes, we definitely want that. So I will link that in the show notes. And if you're listening, you can always find the show notes there for this episode. It'll be itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 37. And that's where you can get all of these things she's mentioning.
In electricity, I think no student should go through a physics course in high school without generating electricity. So take a solenoid, take a magnet. It's such a simple experiment, but it's so important for students to understand just how basic electricity generation is.
That sounds so fun. I know I've said this 1,000 times, but I want to be in your class. I want to shoot action figures with projectile things, and I want to make electricity.
Another one I love is building pan flutes. So a lot of physics experiments can actually be turned into sort of like engineering activities where students will need to calculate the lengths of straws to create pan flutes, and then they can actually play music on their pan flutes. That one's really fun.
That sounds awesome. Well, and if you have any like resources or blog posts for any of these, send them and we'll make sure to link them so that everyone can access them and we can learn from you. Since we can't be in your classroom.
So while I'm thinking of it, I've got a mission control planning and pacing guide. So this is sort of like the go-to guide. If you're not sure where to start with physics, you can download this and it gives a ton of different options for how you can sequence the units. And for each unit, it gives you a bunch of different lab and demo ideas.
Oh, awesome. Is that your liftoff workbook? Or is that something different too?
Liftoff is more like what we're talking about now, like just great tips that you can use for teaching physics.
Okay, we need all of this.
You've got it.
This sounds amazing.
I really feel like after going through and kind of being an island teaching physics and being very isolated, that it was kind of like my mission to go out there and reach out to other physics teachers, especially those who have been voluntold to teach physics, and just be like, here's what I've learned. So Liftoff is a guide to help new to physics teachers, just with different strategies that you can use in your classroom. And then Mission Control is another freebie that goes through different options for sequencing your units and gives lab and demo ideas for each unit.
Okay, these sound amazing. Thank you for making these and making them free. I cannot wait to share them with listeners. So is there anything else that you have that would be helpful for listeners, whether it's advice or resources? We would love to hear it.
Absolutely. Well, the key advice I can give you when you're getting into teaching physics, and I'm sure this applies to every science teacher, is don't grade the entire lab every time.
Yes. Say it louder for the people in the back,
right?
Michelle.
Right. If you just focus on one skill per lab, the students are still learning, but that you're not inundated with a pile of grading. Labs are my kryptonite. They take so long to grade, but if I'm just focusing on one piece, it's much more manageable.
Absolutely. And then it just makes lab day more fun for your students and not as stressful because they're not as worried about like getting all the things down and getting the graph perfect and then getting the analysis copied from their lab group. It's like, I don't care about all of that stuff. Like, especially like you're saying, like in anatomy, when I'm doing a dissection, I don't even really care what they write down. I just care about the experience and what the skills they're doing in the dissection, we write something down just for the sake of it, but it almost just feels unnecessary. And so I love that idea of, even like you said, whether it's a part of the lab or you're just focusing on a skill or whatever it may be, like set you and your students free from the burden of a full formal lab for every single thing and grading all of them. Because like it takes so long to grade, and then they probably don't even remember by the time we get those labs back to them if we can't get them back quickly.
Absolutely. So you need to take care of yourself in that way too. If you're not going to be able to hand it back quick enough, then why are you grading that much of it? Absolutely. And honestly, I've been moving due dates with students and just being really transparent with them and telling them, I have all of this to grade before I can even get to this assignment. So if you guys want the weekend for this, that's no problem. You guys go ahead and take it.
I love that. And I love just showing that you're a real human. Like I always told students, like, we're never going to have tests on Mondays because I'm not going to have you studying on the weekend. And we're also never going to have tests on Fridays because I'm not going to grade the tests over the weekend. So you can just go ahead and know that that's not going to happen because it's not what's best for you or what's best for me.
I absolutely have the same philosophy. Tests are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, yes. Never Monday, Friday.
Monday, it just I'm like, that just feels so harsh to like come in from the weekend and throw a test at a student. Just feels terrible. And then, Friday, I'm trying to like be outside with students or, just doing something fun, definitely not sitting and taking a test. So I'm with you right there. Okay. So final thoughts, whether it's for physics teachers or any secondary science teacher, what do we need to know?
I want you to think about your projects and whether your projects are really going into depth. A project that I developed during my professional master's program was a 5-month epic project. So in this project, it was a really deep project that each month students would focus on one portion. So in the first month, they would focus on research. In the second month, they would focus on building. In the third month, they would focus on experimenting. The fourth month on data collection, the fourth month on data analysis, and the fifth month on reporting. I made this really relevant for students by making this all about local issues. So on our highway, should we have concrete or cable barriers? Should we have high-speed rail in our area? Should this one particular intersection, which is really dangerous, be controlled by traffic lights or by traffic circle? So we go really deep into one idea, one engineering idea, and I find that that's so effective. And students really like that because the pace of it is more casual, but they can think really deeply about this project as opposed to a project that might just be, Googleable, where they can just look up the information online. Here they're building and designing an experiment and testing it. And just the learning behind this is so rich. So consider with your projects whether you can make them even semester-long projects, because you'll be really impressed with the learning that comes out of the students.
Well, and I love the relevancy of, like you said, making it for a specific situation. Like I can think right now of this 4-way stop outside of my kids' preschool. And every time I'm in that 4-way stop, I'm like, man, I wonder if this would just be better if it was a traffic circle. I think that all the time. And how cool would that be for your students, especially at the age you're teaching, they're driving, to give them a relevant problem like that to work through? I think that's such a fun idea.
And in physics, transportation is such a great entry point for any of these projects. And what we've done pre-pandemic is we would have a symposium. So all the students would present their work and we invite their parents and members of the municipal government. We had the mayor come, we had the advocacy group leaders come, and it was really, really neat. But the best part of it, honestly, when you give your students an audience of their parents, it's so incredible. The pride on their faces, it doesn't go away. Like you and I, we both have little kids. And we see them now, and I'm sure we're always really excited if we ever get invited to their school. That doesn't go away when they're seniors. The parents still want to come in and see the great work that their child is doing.
Oh, I have said so many times, I am going to be the worst parent of a student because I'm going to be like, when can I come? When can I volunteer? I want to be requesting a conference so I can just chat with the teachers. And they're going to be like, get out of here. But you're so right. Like, you love your kids. You want to see what they're doing and what they're learning, and how cool for students to be able to do that. I think that's awesome. Okay. Well, last but not least, I like to ask all of my podcast guests for you to share one way that you've simplified your life recently. So it could be a life hack, it could be an organizational tool, something maybe you're saying no to create more time for, your family, or your hobbies or whatever, a resource you're using, something you've stopped doing. Really anything goes as long as it's made your life more simple recently. So what has made your life more simplified recently, Michelle?
It's my grading hack.
Ooh, tell us.
So what I do, of course, is everything that gets submitted in my class has to go in one bin. So I don't teach a ton of students every day because we only have 4 periods a day. And I'm only teaching 3 of those, but I have students submit all of their work to one bin. And then at the end of the day or on my prep period, I'll take that bin, I'll organize it. And then from there, I walk around my classroom to do my grading. I know this sounds weird. It gives me a few extra steps, but more importantly, what it does is it makes the grading go faster and it makes it less distracted because I'm often putting my phone away, or I'll even time lapse this just to make sure that I'm not touching my phone. And what I find there is because I'm grading question by question and just walking through my classroom on the counters, it makes grading so much faster and so much more enjoyable and far less distracted. So then I can go home sooner.
I love that. I love batch grading because I feel the same. If you memorize like the question and you do a question at a time, I feel like I'm so much more fair with partial credit also if I'm doing that. But I've never thought, now that you say that, I remember I've seen you do the time lapse where you lay them all out. And so then you're walking through and doing that. I used to always just like flip a lot, like read a question, flip to the next person. But I love the moving part of that. What a fun idea. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these things. Like I cannot wait to listen to this episode when it comes out, even though I was here for the real life thing. And I'm just so grateful for everything you shared. So let me make sure, how can our listeners find you after this? Because I know that they're going to want to connect with you. So what's the best way to get in touch with you?
I want to invite everyone who's teaching physics to join the physics teacher community on Facebook. And then you can find me on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Mrs. Brosseau's Binder. And if you wanted to send me an email, it's mrs.brosseau@gmail.com.
That's perfect. And I will link all of these. So if you're listening and you're like frantically trying to type this in your phone, you can go to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 37 and all the things will be there for you because I don't want you to miss any of these resources or the Facebook group or anything that Michelle has because I know it's all going to be so helpful. So thanks again, Michelle. I'm super grateful.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you learned as much as I did from my interview with Michelle. If you have questions for her, you can find her on Instagram at Miss Brosseau's Binder, and you can head to the show notes at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 37 for all of the links she mentioned in the episode. And don't forget, this week is your last chance to have your voice heard on the Secondary Science Simplified podcast. Head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/beOnSSS to share your best tip for engaging every learner in your science classes. I can't wait to hear your advice and to compile it and share it with other listeners. Thank you for your help in making this upcoming episode of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast possible. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.